What's going on, everybody? This Afro Think Tank. Have you ever wondered what would happen if all of the continent of Africa were to unite? You ever wondered that? Now, before we get into this video, because that's what this is about, I want you to think about what unification really means, right? What uniting means, right? What is America called? It's called the United States of America. The United States got to where it was because the states united and became a federation, right? And they got over their differences in order to become a more powerful union, right? And, slavery, right? You got the United Kingdom, right? The United Kingdom wasn't always a great nation that could rule the world, which they did, right? But in order for that to happen, different clans, different tribes of Europeans had to unite, despite their differences, despite going to war, despite all the things that happened, they had to unite. And when they did unite, they took over the whole goddamn world, right? I mean, come on. Now, look at the United Nations, right? The EU. All those European countries that have been fighting for thousands of years for various different reasons, right? They didn't come stable economies until they decided, to get over their tribal and ethnic and religious differences, right? In order to connect their economies to create a pleasant environment, for people to live and thrive and grow, all right? So with that being said, why wouldn't that same thing be for Africa? Right now, currently, all those United European nations that I mentioned, right, do everything they can to make sure that Africa doesn't emulate that. Because if Africa were to emulate that with all the resources that they have, with the amount of people that they have, with the advantages that they have, that one unification would be so powerful that no other group, even if they were to unify with other groups that they're not unified with, they would not be able to compete. That's why it's important for the Western world to make sure to do everything they can to slow down the unification of Africans and to do everything they can to stop the unification of African people globally, right? Because it's the most dangerous thing to Western civilization. And Western civilization means white civilization. Remember that. Western civilization means white civilization. Now, let's go back further. Let's go back to ancient Africa, right? In order to build civilizations that can create big megalithic structures like the Great Wall of Benin, right? Like the Egyptian pyramids, like the Nubian pyramids, like the giant stone city structures of Central Africa, and various other megalithic structures that the world awes and wonders over, right? It required a certain level of peace. Because if you are always constantly at war and destroying, you can never build. So what that meant was Africa at one point, even though they have different tribes, different languages, different cultures, they were united economically, right? That means a West African metalsmith, right? And an East African, concrete pourer or rocksmith, or whatever you call it, whoever mastered the art of building with rocks, right? Or a painter from South Africa, or a designer for Central Africa, or some kind of technical architect from North Africa, all came together to build all those megalithic structures that we find all around Africa, right? Africa was not just a bunch of stagnant nations that didn't know about each other, right? We were connected through rivers that you don't see now, connected through trade routes, which are still being used today, right? And connected through all other manners of communication and cultural relevance and connectivity, especially since every single tribe in Africa, if you go to the edge of that tribe and you look to the border on the other side with the other tribe, it's an amalgamation. It blends in. So no tribe is completely delineated from any other tribe. It's just that at some point they blend in until they become something else, right? Many of the different tribes or nations that we know now are really just language-speaking groups filled with many different ethnic groups, right? Many different phenotypes that we consider like Nilotics or Afro-Asiatic, which I don't like the Afro-Asiatic term because there is not a single African that looks Asian. It's literally impossible because we were here first. There's not a single African that has Chinese-looking eyes. There's not a single African on the planet that looks anything like Asians. It's only Asians that look African. Because remember, we're here first. Like, you don't, like for instance, Your father don't look like you. You look like your father. Okay? It's that damn simple, right? But the unification of Africa, which is currently in the process right now. And you got to understand, unification, when we think unification of Africans and African people, we kind of complicate it too much, in our thought process and thinking it's never going to happen because things are just too different or because there's too much corruption, right? But throughout human history, there's always been corruption. Every political organization, every government since governments have been created, they all been corrupt, right? Because men are corrupt. Men are fallible by nature. But through that fallacy, through the corruption, we managed to get one or two things done for the people, for the greater population. And there's no difference now what's happening in Africa. As, of course, we know, we have puppet regimes backed by Western puppets and Western NGOs and Western governments that it behooves them, because they need the resources of Africa, like a baby needs his mother's breast milk to survive, right? So, of course, they stagnate that process, but at the same time, coming out of the fire of all the oppression that Africa has gone through over the last, I would say, century, or let's say 1,000 years, right? Out of the ashes, we have new growth, right? And that new growth and that new ideology is, hey, we're looking at Europe. We're looking at America, and we see how things work. We want to work. And then what do we have to do? Let's emulate the good things of these places, even though these places are natural opposition. So Africa does have what was it? I think it's Project 2060 or Project 2064, right? Where all African countries have a goal, right, to unite the United States of Africa, right? And I find it kind of funny that you have the United States of America, USA, right? And you have this little group, right? This little xenophobic hate group called FBA, Foundational Black Americans, right? Right? But eventually, because y'all know I already co-opted that shit and got Foundational Black Africans, right? But we got to say it out loud because the acronym has been tainted by those xenophobic, hateful, self-hating traitors, right? But when Africa finally unites, and what does that look like? Does that mean every country becomes a state, right? Will that have an ego issue? Because what president wants to become a governor? Seems like a demotion, right? Which country wants to become a state? Seems like a demotion. But what are the benefits of that being the case? Right? What are the benefits? The economic benefits are boundless, right? Because once borders are eliminated, which you got to remember, every African country and their borders are European created, artificial, man-made, Western white man-made. And those countries was carved up because of their resources, right? So now that Africans are taking control of their resources, which is step one, taking back what belongs to you, right? It's time to interconnect and create an economy that can't be rivaled by anybody. There is absolutely not a nation on this planet, not a group of people on the planet that can defeat a unified Africa. And there are African people, right? African heads of state. There are powerful people in powerful positions, both in the private sector and the government sector of Africa, that are making these bold moves right now, slowly but surely. They have to get through their own parliaments. They have to get through their own Congress, get through their own governments, get through their own societies and educate them on the benefits of these things, because the general populace may not understand or see the bigger picture. Right? And we know as we do this, it's not like the white Western world is going to sit back and just allow it to happen. They're going to send their spies. They're going to send all of their disruptors. They're going to finance and campaign any kind of militia that will disrupt. As we can see right now, as Iran is trying to uplift themselves economically, we see what the Western world is doing. If you look at the Middle East, who are trying to uplift themselves economically, we can see the West right now has no problem dropping bombs on them and funding militias against other governments in order to destabilize their countries, so that the European nations can continue to exploit the area for oil and trade route access, right? So if we see them doing it to them, you should think that more likely, as Africa starts to ramp up, the Europeans will become more aggressive after they become more desperate, right? Some European countries will capitulate, and they will want to play nice because they know the inevitability will make it so they will have to play ball eventually with a superior force that they have absolutely no way of defeating in any manner, especially once Africa fully stands up. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn what's happening. I'm going to open your eyes to show you, despite all the propaganda that you hear on TV, despite all the conflicts that you see is happening in West Africa, understand the reason why all these things are happening is because Africa is rising, and those that don't want Africa to rise is doing everything they can economically, socially, militarily to stop that or slow it down, because it can't be stopped, right? Africa will be the United States of Africa. It will be the new USA. And we, foundational Black Africans, will be the only FBA acronym that matters. All right? But anyway, without further ado, this is Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
Imagine this, every African nation deciding to unite, just one agreement. Here's what would happen in the first 30 days, and you will never see day 30 coming. Day 1, leaders sign one historic treaty. Borders open across the continent. No visas, no checkpoint, just one African passport. Days 2 to 4, social media erupts. Families separated by colonial borders unite, and students apply for universities thousands of miles away without a second thought. Days 5 to 7, traders move goods freely. Ports in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa start seeing record traffic, and them landlocked countries finally have ocean access without foreign fees. Days 8 to 12, airlines announce a new Pan-African flight route. Road and rail projects gets greenlit overnight, and tourism explodes as Africans start exploring their own continent. I think I'll be paying them a visit as well. Days 13 to 17, small businesses boom. Markets filled with products from every corner. Ghanaian chocolate in Sudan, Ethiopian coffee in Senegal, and Congolese fashion in Morocco. Oof. Days 18 to 21, the rest of the world can't act like it ain't happening. Western media runs headlines, new African superpower emerges, and trade partners scramble to negotiate them deals. Days 22 to 25, things get a little spicy. African tech companies merge resources, shared energy grids, satellites, internet infrastructure, slash costs, and a single currency is proposed. Days 26 to 29, foreign corporations panic. At this point, they can't play African nations against each other anymore. Investment shifts inward. African banks are funding African projects. Day 30, and Africa isn't just a continent. It's the world's largest single market, the youngest workforce, and the richest resource base. Let that sink in. For the first time in centuries, every African knows it. They called it a sleeping giant. Turns out it was never asleep, just waiting to move as one. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth, and what was that? What was that? We don't clap for crumbs. Yeah, I enjoyed this one.
And at that time, we shall not be measuring our GDP in dollar terms. We shall be measuring our GDP in Afro terms. Our currency will be called Afro. And the Afro will be the strongest currency in the world. And the GDP of South Africa will be 3 trillion. That the per capita income of South Africa will be 30,000 Afro. And that all our children will go and gain education from primary to university, the cost being underwritten by our taxes. That all our minerals will have a value addition. That we shall no longer be importing complete products from China. There will be a mobile phone. Namibia will be manufacturing a mobile phone. And that 1 million Africans will be using that mobile phone. That phone will be called Mobi Africa. And Namibia will not stop there. I look to that day, Botswana will no longer be selling any cows to Europe. Those cows and the meat from Botswana will be consumed in the continent of Africa, and Lesotho will not be left behind, and Eswatini will also be a Shangri-La where we will go for tourism, and it will not stop there. Mozambique will have some of the biggest ports in Africa, and Tanzania will be there, and Malawi will be there, and Zambia will be there, and Angola will be there, and Equatorial Guinea will have new leaders, and Equatorial Guinea will be the equivalent of the Silicon Valley. In 2063, the Democratic Republic of Congo will no longer have any conflict. We'll have power being generated from the Inga Dam, and I can assure you that at that time, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and South Sudan, and Ethiopia, and Eritrea, and Somalia, and Djibouti, there'll be a road connecting all these countries. And it will not stop there. It will go on to Central African Republic. It will go on to Cameroon and Gabon and Benin and Togo and Sierra Leone and Liberia and the Gambia and Mali and Mauritania and all these countries and Sao Tome and Principe and the Seychelles and Mauritius, because there'll be leaders at that time.
I find it very interesting and pertinent that Africa, China, and India right now have the same population, basically, 1.4 billion people each. The biggest operating difference, aside from poverty and the ecological conditions and so forth, is that Africa is 55 independent countries. India and China are unified states, albeit in a kind of federal arrangement or semi-decentralized arrangement in both cases to some extent. So Africa's biggest issue, in my view, is unity, creating a free trade area on the continent, organizing its infrastructure on a continental scale, having continental-wide monetary and financial policy, and really trying to replicate scale so that the internal market of the African continent and other benefits of scale can be achieved. And this is a huge political issue. Obviously, countries don't easily don't easily cede sovereignty to a supranational entity, but Africa is so far behind, so much in need of development right now, so vulnerable internally and externally, that I think the case can be made, and I'm certainly trying to make it all the time to African leaders, that they better create an effective union right now. And this is a message that I give all the time. Having said that, if the union can really be created, one can actually foresee a rapid growth period for Africa, which would be unprecedented, basically. And the reason is poor countries have headroom for rapid growth. This is the most basic idea in economic growth, which is that if you're capital scarce, the returns to investment are very significant. If you don't have electricity, it's great to add electricity. If you don't have roads, it's great to add roads. If you don't have rail, you get a really big return to adding rail. If you don't have high school completion, boy, do you get a big kick from going to high school completion. So you can identify the investment strategy that's needed. And I worked out in a recent study that I did with the African Development Bank a scenario for the next 40 years modeled on China's 40-year growth from 1980 to 2020, in which Africa becomes a high-income economy by 2063, which is their 100th anniversary of African unity. Now, just one added footnote to that, Africa was about 7% of the world population, if I remember correctly, in 1950. Today, it's about 18%. Africa is the only region of high fertility in the world right now. It's the last place with the demographic transition. It will have it, but it hasn't had it yet because it hasn't had the breakthrough to girls' education through high school and other things, and urbanization and so on. So the transition will come, but in 20 years from now, perhaps. And this means that on a reasonable trajectory, I mean, plausible is what I mean. I don't mean good, but just plausible trajectory, Africa will have 2.5 billion people around mid-century, maybe 2055, 2060. And on the current UN medium forecast, which I don't think is accurate, but it's their medium forecast, Africa reaches 3.8 billion people by 2100 and constitutes 38% of the world population by 2100. Now, imagine if Africa grows rapidly in economic terms and has this population growth. Africa becomes actually a major part of the world economy, not a fringe part of the world economy, even by mid-century or by 2060. So this is my view of what should happen. It is a major political action that is required more than anything. It is the unity to say we're going to do this in one coherent step, because frankly 55 countries are not going to make it on their own, and 14 of them are landlocked, and landlocked countries can't even function if they don't have ports. So to put it bluntly, if Africa gets its political act together, and again, it was Europe that created this messy map, but if Europe gets its political act together, it's going to be a big part of the world in the 21st century.
Africa isn't trying to catch up anymore. Some leaders want to merge. Across the continent, a new generation of African leaders is reviving an old idea, the United States of Africa. Not symbolism, not slogans, actual political and economic unity. The idea goes back to Pan-African thinkers who believed Africa would never be truly sovereign if it stayed divided into borders drawn by colonial powers. Today, that idea is being pushed in a modern form: shared currency, open borders, unified defense, continental infrastructure instead of foreign dependence. Projects like continent-wide trade agreements and joint development banks aren't random. They're steps toward reducing reliance on Europe, China, and the US. Here's the part people ignore. A united Africa would control the world's largest reserves of critical resources, a massive labor force, and one of the youngest populations on Earth. That scares existing global powers. Unity means leverage. Leverage means independence. Whether it fully happens or not, one thing is clear: Africa isn't asking for a seat at the table anymore. Some leaders want to build their own.
Imagine if Africa became one giant country, the United States of Africa. It would be the biggest nation on Earth, even larger than Russia. Countries like Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa, they'd just be states now. With 1.5 billion people, it would have the largest population, beating China and India. And its location? Perfect for global trade. Controlling the Suez Canal and the Strait of Gibraltar would make it a powerhouse in shipping and commerce. Plus, Africa is stacked with resources: gold, diamonds, oil, rare minerals, you name it. But here's the twist. Despite all that, its economy would still rank 15th worldwide, behind places like Canada and South Korea. And let's not forget the challenges: over 2,000 languages, massive cultural diversity, and economic gaps. Could this supernation actually work? Or would it be too chaotic to handle? What do you think?
We don't have borders in Europe. But when it comes to us, they say, no, you must have borders. Why? The division of Africa is what makes them thrive. They thrive on the division of the African continent. Can you imagine the minerals of DRC combined with the minerals of South Africa and with a new currency based on the minerals? What we can do to the dollar if we become a United States of Africa with our minerals alone. We can collapse the dollar. We can collapse the strong pound that is based on gold, yet they don't have a gold mine. So why do you allow such things? There were no borders, and we must all of us unite in that call. Free movements of peasants, free movements of goods will make this country flourish.
Y'all are not seeing the vision because Ibrahim Traore wants to unite all African countries under one roof and call them the United States of Africa, and now you realize why they want to get rid of him. May Allah protect Ibrahim Traore at all costs, but